link.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at the first ever digital launch of the Global Education Monitoring Report. Yesterday we had global launch events in Rwanda, Indonesia, Colombia, and the United Kingdom. And we're excited to be holding a special digital launch today, which enables young people around the world to take part. I'm Aaron Benevote. I'm the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. We call it the GEM report. And I'm going to share a bit of information about the report before I pass it on to Salam Al-Nukta, the report youth advisor, who will be moderating the discussion and with an amazing group of young people that we have with us today. The GEM report is an editorially independent and evidence-based report that is published every year by UNESCO. We're mandated by governments to monitor progress toward education targets in the new Sustainable Development Goals. Basically, this means it's up to us to examine lots of different evidence to assess whether progress is being made by countries on the promises they made for education. Last year, countries adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which they committed to achieve by 2030. They also agreed to specific targets toward ending poverty and hunger, improving health and gender equality, reducing inequalities in society, building sustainable cities, promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, and taking urgent action on climate change to protect our planet. Our report this year, it's entitled Education for People and Planet, Creating Sustainable Futures for All, looks at many roles education can play in helping to achieve this very broad and ambitious agenda. Firstly, we hope that this report acts as a bit of a wake-up call because it shows that we're not going to achieve some of the key targets in education that countries have committed to unless we do things radically differently. But it's definitely not all gloom and doom. The report shows that even modest progress in education can have multiple benefits across all of society. And finally, the report looks at the core issue of learning, where learning takes place, what we learn, and for what purpose. For example, all too often, when we talk about education, we only are really talking about education in schools and formal institutions. This report shows that if we're serious about achieving sustainable development and its many targets and our education goal, we need to focus on learning throughout life and in many places, at home, in school, in universities, in the community, and in the workplace. And even more importantly, it discusses the need to think a little bit more about what it is we're learning. Certainly, it's important to numeracy. Obviously, these are very important, but education should also aim to build global citizens and foster green skills that will help us move toward development that protects our people and planet. So, with that introduction, I'd like to hand the floor to Salam to introduce the panel. It's all yours.
Thank you, Aaron, and welcome everyone. I'm Salam Al-Nukta, a young person from Syria, where the ongoing conflict has had a devastating impact on the education system, leaving the young generation in hesitation of what the future is holding for their education. However, where I come from, young people are still desperate to learn, looking at education as a savior to a more peaceful and developed world. I'm also the youth advisor for the Global Education Monitoring Report, or GEM. I'm honored to be moderating the digital launch. I'm very excited to have a very esteemed group of young activists from around the world to discuss the importance of education in order to ensure our collective sustainable future. I will start by asking some general questions to our young activists, but really, we want to hear from you, particularly young people whose current and future opportunities are so directly affected by the type and quality of education they have access to. So ask away. As a start, could you please start by introducing yourselves before we take off? Anusha, you can start.
Hi everybody, I'm Anusha from Pakistan, and I'm very excited to be part of this digital launch. Actually, I'm part of Pakistan's representative to UN Secretary General's Global Education First initiative. And I've been working at grassroots level, trying to improve the quality of education, which is delivered through public and private partnership.
Thank you, Anusha. Go on introducing yourselves, and then I will start asking the questions. David, you're next.
Thanks. My name is David. I'm from the UK. I was also a member of the Global Education First Initiative's Youth Advocacy Group. And here in the UK, I'm a director of the British Youth Council, which is the National Youth Council of the UK. And we're working to empower young people to engage in political structures, to engage in their schools, to engage other young people in the world around them on making their voice heard on issues that they're passionate about and which affect their lives.
Thank you, David. Joseph?
Hi everyone, I'm Josephine Bonza, joining from Kampala, Uganda, and I've lived mostly in Uganda, but I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course as a result of conflict, that's why I'm in Uganda. But in Uganda, what I do, I work with the Koburas International Youth Organization Transform Africa, and we work mostly with the refugees children and children from rural areas to increase access to education from primary school to secondary school. And we are also partnering with different universities around the world to make sure refugee students also have access to university education. But at the same time, because of the poor quality of learning in our systems, we've incorporated skills learning, whereby young people are also given like an entrepreneurship and the leadership education so that they can really connect their learning to the communities they live in. So good to join you, and hoping to continue to interact with you guys.
Thank you, Joseph. So, Peter?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Ocheng Peter. I'm currently in Canada at the Code International Institute studying international leadership. I'm a youth with cerebral palsy, and I'm the chair of Global Partnership on Children with Disabilities Youth Council. This is a group of young people with disabilities from around the world, and we are supported by UNICEF. One of our main objectives is to ensure the effective implementation of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, seeing that how youth can play a role in the implementation, and how children with disabilities can also benefit from the benefits intended by the convention. In Uganda, I work with an association for people with cerebral palsy, whereby we have been working in capacity building for young people with cerebral palsy to be able to advocate for their rights and to benefit from their rights. I'm very happy to join on this event and to speak on behalf of young people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think you're going to do great. Vaibu? Vaibu, do you hear me? Can you introduce yourself, please? Okay, I'm gonna let Vivian introduce herself, and then we're gonna come back to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivian Onano. I'm joining the call from Johannesburg, South Africa, but I'm Kenyan. I'm the partnerships manager for Seed Project, a global organization that uses sports, mainly basketball and education, to empower young people across the continent. And I'm also the youth ambassador for WaterAid America. Oh, and also I had the pleasure of attending the launch yesterday in Kigali.
Yeah, we're going to ask you about this. Thank you. So, Bibu, can you introduce yourself,
Salam,
please?
am I audible now?
Yes,
Salam,
you are.
am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm Vibhu from India. I'm currently doing my master's in English literature at St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi. I'm very actively involved in voicing the concerns of persons with disability, and especially persons with visual impairment, being one myself. I'm currently the co-chair of Global Partnership of Education for Children with Disabilities Youth Council, which is supported by UNICEF. And I believe my colleague Peter, who is a chair at present, has already explained about the Youth Council, not leaving enough for me to talk about. But then I'm also involved with one of the task forces that the Youth Council has, which is on leadership and mentoring.
Thank you very much. Going back to Vivian, you just said that you were yesterday in the lunch. You spoke in the panel at the lunch event in Kigali yesterday. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it was an honor being at the launch yesterday in Kigali. It was a very successful event. The turnout was great. The panelists were fantastic. And clearly, there's a commitment towards SDG 4 on education. And it was agreed by everybody that for us to have a just and peaceful and prosperous future, education has to be the building block. And also, the Minister for Education from Rwanda actually shared with us the progress that they've made so far towards SDG 4 in Rwanda. They've been able to achieve gender parity in both primary and secondary education, which is a really great step forward towards making education inclusive for every child. As we know, education is a fundamental human right that every child should have access to, but that is not the reality. Based on the statistics that were stated yesterday, 263 million children, adolescents, and youth are out of school. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we have 32 million girls who are out of school. So there's still work that needs to be done, but also progress has been made, and we have to celebrate that, but we don't have to be complacent. It was also there's also a lot of conversation around financing for SDG 4, and that is going to be the way forward for us to achieve this development agenda by 2042. But if we continue the current trend, then we can only achieve it by 2084, possibly not reality. So I think there's need for partnership, and there's need for intentional and sustainable financing for SDG 4.
Thank you, Vivian. I think you just said some huge numbers for people out of school, being out of school. So why is it so important to make sure actually girls and young women around the world can receive an education? Vivian.
Thank you again. As I said, education is a fundamental human right, and every child should have access to. But that is not the reality based on the statistics that I just shared, and also knowing that 62 million girls globally are out of school. Denying these girls, denying women an opportunity to education is denying them an opportunity at a better life. Because with access to education, they grow up to be better mothers, make choices for themselves and for their children, and then become better contributors to the social, economic, and political development of their family, of their communities, and of their countries at large. And also, education empowers and gives a voice. We need more women leaders, but the only way we can be able to have more women leaders is if we empower the young girls with access to quality education that gives them a voice, empowers them, and makes them aware of their rights. right now, gender violence continues to be a main issue, and most of it goes unreported. I think based on a statistic that was released last week in South Africa, there were 41,516 rape cases last year in South Africa. But we don't know how many that are out there that were not reported. And it's because sometimes we women and we young girls, we tend to blame ourselves for this thing when it's not our fault. It's not our fault, and we have to report the perpetrators of violence. So gender violence also continues to be a main issue, and also due to lack of education and lack of being aware of our rights as young women and young girls, most of it goes unreported. Access to clean water and sanitation. Girls continue to drop out of school due to lack of access to clean water and sanitation. In Sierra Leone, 21% of the girls drop out of school once they reach puberty. They start menstruating and they don't have clean water. They don't have clean sanitation. They don't have toilets that are just for the girls and for the boys. So that dignity and self-esteem and self-confidence in the process actually just goes away, because if I don't feel like during the menstruation, and probably some of the girls use clothes. So in the process of using the clothes, and they don't have access to clean water to clean themselves and to clean their clothes, the odor that comes from that has negative effects on their health, and also has negative effects on their self-esteem and self-confidence. And as a result, some of them drop out of school because of that. And others even go to the extreme of selling their bodies so that they can be able to buy sanitary towels, so that they can continue with their education. When menstruation is a biological cycle that we should embrace and should not be a way of shaming young girls and young women. So I think there's a lot that needs. We also have to address child marriage. 39,000 girls under the age of 18 are married on a daily basis. We are losing on our human potential. We are losing on half of the global population. So if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, if we are to make them a reality, we have to make sure that women and girls are empowered with the right tools and the right education, so that they're informed of their rights, they're informed of their rights, but they're also able to maximize on their God-given capabilities to become the best that they can be in their society. If this is not made a reality, then actually we should stop talking about achieving the SDGs by 2030. But also there's need for intentional and sustainable investment in education, and mostly education for women and girls, because there are also so many cultural barriers that hinder girls from achieving education, and we have to move past that. Girls spend a lot of hours, waste a lot of hours every day trying to look for water before they go to school. Imagine waking up in the morning, you have to walk 4 kilometers to go fetch water, bring it back home, and then you have to start the firewood before you can actually dress and go to school. By the time you get to school, you're already tired, and then you have to compete with other boys in your class and be the best. I mean, it's a disadvantage, and we cannot continue like that. So these are issues that really need to be addressed. Most of the time we talk about them and move on, but we have to have tangible solutions that we can work on to make sure that it's a reality for every young girl to achieve access to education, and every young girl to maximize on their human-given potential.
Thank you, Vivian. And I think with women like you, we are definitely going to achieve our goals. So Anusha, Vivian just mentioned that when girls are educated, it's not only a benefit for themselves, but also to the whole community and to the whole world. So is it possible, so can you tell us how education can help building peace? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, sorry. Yes. So I think that one of the most important thing while in the construction of identity and the formation of actually perceptions about various things in the world is education. And education plays a very pivotal role when we are going to inculcate some kind of prejudices or hatred towards other people. For example, in Pakistan, we have this issue of sectarian violence, or we have this prejudice towards people of other communities, which is in its extremist form then leading to violence and to intolerance, and it's manifesting itself in the form of blasts and suicide attacks. So I think that one of the first thing which leaders and which policymakers can do is to depoliticize the curriculum which is taught at schools, and to make sure that it is as empathetic and as perceptive as possible. And the important thing is that, and it kind of aligns with the idea of global citizenship education. However, I think that one of the more important thing to realize over here is that the curriculum should inculcate critical thinking skills among students. And it will actually enable them to find the nuances and to make choices for themselves, which is really not what is happening in the developing or in countries or in places where we have conflict. However, I think that we also need to realize that a lot of students do not really get formal education, and we have to, having a change in the curriculum is a very long-term process, and it cannot be achieved until we have there are a lot of stakeholders involved, and you cannot achieve such a political change because education in such situations become a political tool until you have leaders on board. So to have more change at the grassroots levels, I think that we have to intervene in the classrooms by training teachers to make sure that they are more inclusive when they are teaching, and maybe by training teachers, and bringing them on board, we can make sure that education is not basically a propaganda, and it is something where you are nurturing people and ensuring that they know how to live in harmony and live together. So that's it.
Thank you very much. What do you think? Sorry, Anusha. Okay. What do you think is the effect? How do you think, or what effect will improving access to education have on development in poverty?
Thank you so much. I think that it will obviously encourage people to, and actually give them the skills to have better jobs, a better livelihood, and it will enable people, because it will enable people to to engage in entrepreneurship activities, and it will actually also give them the opportunity to start their own businesses, which is something which we see in Pakistan specifically, or in the developing countries, that because of a lack of education after secondary level or high school, people are not actually skilled enough to do something on their own, and then they have to rely on clerical or very meager jobs to fulfill their to empower themselves. Another statistic which is important over here is that if young people in low-income countries are educated, then 60 million people would be brought out of poverty, and that is a very significant number. And I think that, education is also a very important. Educating young people is also a very important, critical way in improving the economy of a country. So I think that this is one way in which we can ask our leaders and our the key players in the policy at the policy level to invest in education, and to make sure that education is financed, it is prioritized, and it is given importance.
Yes, and thank you, Anusha. I would like to add, and maybe just emphasis on what you just said, that education is so linked to achieving the other SDGs. So this is also an important point. Joseph, I'd like to direct my next question to you. Why is education so important for refugees? And I think there is a common word between we share. It's like refugees. So can you tell us more on this?
Okay, thank you, Salama. I think, first of all, we all understand that when you are empowering the most vulnerable person, the one who I think needs more energy, or the hungriest person is the one who always needs more food than any other person. And if we see refugees are the people who have lived and are still living in complex situations, the ones whose homes need to be rebuilt. And so I think that education to refugees, I think it's the most important thing the world needs to focus on, because you've seen an example of how many people have talked of aid coming to Africa and being useless because it comes when people in Africa don't know how to use it. And so for us to rebuild like communities of which are causing where refugee people come from, I think we need to empower refugees, and the main thing to empower them is by giving them quality education. And when I talk of quality education, I think like the director of the program, Mr. What is the name again? The one who was sharing with us the report, he was mentioning how education has to go beyond this formal learning. People need skills, and so refugees are those ones who are at the age of going to school. They need to be given education, and beyond the classroom, they need to be given skills training. But also, even those ones whose age does not allow them to go to formal learning, they need to be given skills. For refugees, I think it would be good for me to use an example of the work we do here in Uganda. When we realized that depending on UNHCR is not going to help us, as young people, we decided to open our own programs whereby we could train other young people to help them do well in their classroom. But with the time, we also wanted to add something which would help them to have skills to be able to do the work in the community. And today we have more than 600 young people who have gone through our secondary school program, and most of them are not able to go to university. But if you see what they have done, they've come back to the community to set up more number of nursery schools, primary schools, and others are working in the community farming programs which increase the food production in the refugee camp. And by working with these young people and their families, we've been able to set up a primary school which is educating over 400 young people, refugees. And this school last year sat for the first national examination. Now it's competing at the national level, because in the national exams, the school was among the best 20 schools in the district. And this is a school which is run by refugees. And the outcome is that now parents of refugee children in the community were motivated to support the school program, to put more girls in school, but at the same time they feel more empowered because they see progress in their community, which is like driven from inside. And so, like I said, education for refugees is the only thing, is the only sustainable solution we can give them to prepare them for better communities, and I think for the general better world for everyone.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you a lot. Now, I know your organization does a lot of leadership development, and this is what you also mentioned. What needs to happen to empower more young people to play a role in actually decision making?
I think the most important thing is to involve young people. When you see both in refugee running programs, like people who work in refugee communities, but also in our governments around the world, most of the time you find guys who are like 50, 70, 80 years are the ones who are talking about the youth issues. And like things have really changed everywhere today with technology. Some old people don't fully understand what is happening in the world. And I feel if we involve young people, I think it's the best way to do it. And like what I'm saying, the way we work with young people, when someone is in high school, before you complete high school in our programs, you have to participate. Every week you have a number of hours you need to work on, either to work on an individual project or to work in a general project you are running. And by doing that, these young people see the impact they are having in the community. And sometimes, most of them, when they're involved like for 2-3 years, they end up developing ideas of going to start something, because like the best way to empower people, the best way to prepare young people, we have to involve them, and that is in decision making, but also to give them opportunity to participate. If it's hands-on activity, if it's a dialogue, that's the best way to empower them. Not to say that you are planning for them. That one will never work.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Now, Peter. Unfortunately, these days, people with disabilities are more likely to be sidelined. What do young people with disabilities need from their communities and governments in order to achieve their education goals?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the beginning point is that we all know that education is a universal human right. It's not something to be given as charity or something just to sympathize with any category of people, despite disabled or non-disabled. When we look at the report from UNICEF in 2013, whereby they are talking about 10% of children with disabilities who managed to go to school. At the end of it all, half of them managed to complete school. You see, that is a very big number. And knowing that in our current economic situation and life situation, education is the main tool of empowerment for self-sustainability. So I think that the beginning point of it is that our communities and our government need to recognize that education is a right to everyone. It's a right to people with disabilities. It is not a charity. And after recognizing that, it is important to make their opportunities for children with disabilities and young people to acquire education. Well, the major thing is that the schools has to be accessible. Teachers have to know how to handle different kinds of disabilities. We have over 20 different types of disabilities. Some are even unknown to us who are disabilities, but they are there and they exist. And so if the government can't accommodate such, then we people with disabilities are automatically excluded from our education. And also it is the responsibility of the teachers and the community to provide, to be accommodative. For example, when I look at myself, when I was going to school, my teachers didn't know what type of disability I had. They didn't know how to help me. They thought by caning me every day is the one way they can help me to write very well. But since then up to today, I've never learned how to write. And this has really forced very many children with disabilities to drop out of school because the environment is not really accommodative and it is not really friendly to them. So I think it is all about setting the environment first, and then we can enroll children with disabilities and monitor them. I think it is also important to collect data concerning children with disabilities and young people with disabilities going to school. We are always basing on estimates of the area which are known or people who have managed to come out. It's what is based on as the estimate of people with disabilities going to school. This can't be sufficient in planning and giving the right incentives to enable children with disabilities go and study very well. I also think that as the government, when I look at, for example, in Uganda, when they are budgeting, each year they are reducing on the budget amount allocated to inclusive education. Instead of increasing it, Each year they are reducing it, and when I try to inquire, they say that they are misusing the money. The schools, the education ministers, and the authorities don't know how to utilize this money in order to impact on children with disabilities in school. For example, in June, before I went to Canada for my studies, I had to go and visit a school where there is this young girl. She's going to sit her final exams, but they're telling her to not to do some subjects because she has cerebral palsy. She cannot write for herself, so they are telling her she cannot do physics, she cannot do chemistry because and biology because they have practicals. But without these subjects, she cannot get her O-level certificate, and that's why she needs to continue for further studies. So in such circumstances, it is upon the government to come in with its available incentives to ensure that such people are provided with helpers to help them transfer their exams or other alternative means of assessment to enable them achieve the same quality education as their counterparts.
Thank you so much, Peter. Your points are clear, and I really hope we overcome this global issue. Now, you just said that education is a universal human right. How do we ensure in achieving our goals of universal education?
I think that UNESCO clearly stated that, like, how we can do this. In its recently published report, UNESCO states that the beginning point is that we should make schools accessible, including in this case, you should ensure that children with disabilities do not just have to get out of their wheelchair to get into their classes or to go and access toilets. Vivian was talking about girls who face challenges during their menstrual periods. We also have children with disabilities who have spinal injury, who can't hold their urine or their other stuff. So we find that such a child cannot study in the same class with other students because of her condition. She's always thinking, and then it may not be that necessarily it is her or his problem. We also have to invest in teacher training. As I told you that my teachers, their major problem was that they didn't know how to help me, but they could comment that I'm bright. They could comment that I'm a good student, that they could make me to repeat the class because I don't know how to write. They just didn't know how to help me. They didn't know how to engage or empower me differently so that I can be at the same learning space with other students. We also have to make the learning materials available. Like that's like when we got online, everyone was wondering about people's jobs or assistive device she's using. So it is the same case when you go to the outside world, when you go to class and they're hearing your computer is making some sound, they will wonder that, what is that? So you find that in such circumstances, we need to make information accessible to people with disabilities depending on their disabilities. When I was in university, we had a student with low vision, but never could they print exams in large print to cater for his needs. And then this was one of the most inclusive university in Uganda, and university known for teaching inclusive education and offering special needs to students with disabilities. So in that case, we really need to make sure that information is available to all categories of people with disabilities in an accessible format in regards to their disabilities. The UNESCO also emphasizes the assistive technology. This is another very important part of learning. Like the fact that some children can't go to school because they can't crawl for 5 kilometers from their homes to go to school. They can't go to school during the rainy season because the place is muddy. Or a deaf child can't go to a mainstream school because he can't afford to get an interpreter, or the teachers don't know sign language. And in that case, by ensuring that we have assistive technology, the government invest in assistive technology and other partners, this will really empower and encourage more children with disabilities to study and acquire education. And also, it is important, as I said, that to collect information and data. Data will help us to monitor how our children with disabilities going on with their studies, what is working and what is not working. So I think that this kind of framework developed by UNESCO and the partners, including UNICEF, I think it is really something which we should sell out to other stakeholders in order to ensure that we achieve the goal of inclusive education.
Thank you so much, Peter. Now I want to hear from you, Vibhu. What are your views on inclusive education for persons with disabilities, or how important do you think inclusive? Sorry, Vibhu, are you okay? Okay, it's okay. I think it's just a technical issue. So, David, I'm going to ask you, and then when Vibhu comes back, we're going to direct our questions to her. Why is educating young people, and particularly girls, through secondary school, not just primary school, important? Please.
Thanks. So in the MDG agenda, most of the focus tended to be on primary education rather than secondary education. And we've seen that though the MDG agenda in itself was very ambitious, and we saw that progress wasn't being made quickly enough for us to be able to achieve that. And we're again saying that progress isn't being made quickly enough now for us to be able to achieve the SDGs by 2030. The fact that we've included so much more in the SD agenda means that we need to really pick up the pace, and we need to be as smart in the actions that we take to ensure that we achieve much more than we promised we'd achieve in the previous 15 years in the 15 years that are to come. And as I say, one of the key major additional components of the SDGs, which was less focused on in the MDGs, is secondary education. I'll take that part of your question first, and then maybe I can talk a bit more about girls in particular. We think about why we need secondary education. You look in sort of education generally, and you think about the fact that primary education is a starting point. Primary education is only a small proportion of the number of years that young people should spend in education in order to develop themselves fully. We see that primary education tends to provide many of the socio-personal or interpersonal dimensions that are required, but it's kind of preparation for the next stage, for early secondary and secondary education, which provides you with the main content of your education, if you like. They tend to provide you with the majority of the substance matter in the subjects that you're studying. They tend to provide you the mass of development in literacy and numeracy, which is what your primary education helped to develop the foundations of. And when it comes to some of the softer skills, things like critical thinking, things like a sense of global citizenship, these are skills which really are developed in the secondary stages. And of course, it's absolutely vital that you have that secondary education as the foundation upon which university education can be built. And of course, university education tends to, for many employers in professional jobs, is the prerequisite. So we should kind of consider this to be building blocks which lead to secondary and tertiary education. They're sort of subsequent and consequent to each other, and without one you can't proceed to the next. And that's why secondary education really is an important part of this part of the agenda. But then you think in terms of the sort of economic gains. So for the country, the more time that you spend in secondary education, we see the economic gains increase more quickly for secondary education than they would for primary education. Or you think about the jobs which are becoming increasingly available. You think about how technology is changing the workplace or changing the availability of employment over the course of maybe the next 30 years, as technology continues to develop and as it continues to replace lower skilled jobs, which perhaps primary education would prepare people for better than secondary education. People are going to need to be more educated. They're going to need to have more skills in order to get the jobs that are available. The kinds of jobs that are going to be available is going to shrink. The skills that you might need in order to get regular and secure and well-paid employment, that's going to increase. And then I think when it comes specifically to the matter of goals, you look at the name of this report, and it's about people and planet. It's not about boys. It's not about a small proportion of the populace of our planet. It's about all people, and that includes girls who are half of that population. It also includes other groups which are regularly discriminated against, like young people who live in rural areas, like young people who speak a minority language or they come from a minority ethnic group, like young people who are poorer. These are people who are consistently disadvantaged. And so it's important that as we move on to this area of secondary education where we already see less development, so there's more progress to be made, that governments don't just focus on the young people that it's easier to get into education or it's easier to help to make the fastest progress. We need to make sure that the sort of inequalities that we already see largely within primary education aren't further deepened and perpetuated when it comes to secondary education. Girls, the disparity is already wider in secondary education, and we don't want to see a sort of replication of the lopsided progress that we had when it came to primary education in the MDG agenda. But it's totally about disparity. So even when you get young people into education or these minority groups into education, it's about the attention which is afforded to those individual young people can sometimes be disparate, which means that they tend to make progress less quickly. So it's not just about getting young people into education, which I think was a primary aim for the MDG agenda. It's also about that very important part of your question, I think, which is about getting them through education from start to finish. And that's not just from the start of primary to the end of primary. That's from the start of primary, from the day that they enroll, through to the start of secondary, through to the end of secondary. And hopefully, the more young people who can be educated for longer, the better the economic gains for the country, the better the development for the young person, the more access they have to their human rights, and the more chance we'll have of fulfilling the SDG goals by the time that we reach 2030.
David, you're definitely right. I strongly agree with every word you just said. Now, talking to everybody, I just can't emphasize more on the idea that education is tightly connected with other SDGs, and we can't achieve them unless we achieve quality education. How, in your point of view, can education increase personal, family, and community living standards?
Well, there's a lot in this particular question. I mean, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that, you know, education really is the key for personal development, for socioeconomic development, for the development of the country, economic development. But I mean, I suppose there are different components. So when you're thinking about your family, which is the sort of traditional way, the family or the individual level, which is the traditional way we think about living standards, there is that knock-on effect that you talk about. So when you educate all young people, you give women more choice, you see peace is more likely to develop, you see the way that people interact with each other becomes more peaceful. You're less likely to have things like domestic violence. You're more likely to help men to see the importance of women, their wives, having rights and their independence. And then I also think that we see these knock-on effects because often you see that in many countries that are included in the report, women are the prime caregivers. They're the primary caregivers for their children, which means that when you have women educated, when you have women who have access to all of these rights that men increasingly or boys increasingly have access to, then they pass them on to their children. So it's not just, I think, a knock-on effect between the different components of the SDGs, but it's also a knock-on effect between generations and between genders. When you talk about the other component, which I think is about communities, I think it's about in which way we define that community. We tend to think about it in the local setting, but again, there's a close relationship between the local setting, the national setting, and also the international setting. An increasingly important part of the agenda is what we see under SDG 4.7, which is on global citizenship education, which is about providing some of those attributes which contribute to a person's social development, also their political development. You see that the development of the SDG agenda is in itself essentially politics. When you have countries who come together and they debate what should and should not be included, that's in itself a manifestation of politics. There was an incredible consultation process where people from all around the world were included. But when you have a certain segment or a certain proportion of the community who don't have access to education, they can't engage in those political discussions. They can't influence the political institutions in their country. They are much less likely to have access to their rights because they're less likely to understand precisely what their rights are. And that makes them a less active and less privileged member of the community in which they live, I think. And education has, in many cases, been deprived of people because it's important for empowerment, because it helps people to understand that they don't have to accept the status quo, that they can be active citizens. And it's important because as we move on to a part of our world or a part of our history which is increasingly globalized, where we come to depend increasingly upon each other, we're economically connected, we're socially connected, where we see the mass migration of people, be it through sort of economic migration, or be it, as we see, particularly this year and last, the huge number of refugees in the Middle East and increasingly into Europe. We can't any longer rely on considering ourselves to be in these very small communities. We're in a globalized community, and the better that education can help young people to cope with the world in which they are going to live and to contribute positively to that and to protect their rights and to be active global citizens, the better. So there's a huge amount of benefit that comes from education. But I think particularly global citizenship education is the next stage in that. And thankfully, there's a very active group of young people who will be joining us on a network that's set up specifically to advocate with young people on global citizenship education with APCU in Korea, which is a Category 2 institution from UNESCO. So there's so much work that's going on this, and I just think that it's important that young people have the opportunity to engage in global citizenship and what the next stage of that looks like, because it's relatively an under-researched area when it comes to education.
Yes, again, I strongly agree with you, David. Vibhu, I hope you can hear me now.
I can.
Okay.
Can you?
Yes, I do. So we just heard from Peter, and we want to hear from you. What are your views on inclusive education for persons with disabilities? How important do you think inclusive education for persons with disabilities is?
Thank you for your question, Salam. First of all, I really want to apologize for the technical glitches from my side. I'm using Google Hangout with JAWS, and I find it still inaccessible when it comes to screen reading accessibility. But anyway, coming down to your question, Salam, once again for asking it. I guess inclusive education for persons with disability or for students with disability is important for several reasons. One, it is important because when a student with blindness or a student with disability is in a special education system, then most special schools intend to stick to or focus only on one kind of curricula, which in a certain way restricts the access to other kinds of disciplines that persons with disabilities do not get, whereas their non-disabled counterparts do. So, for example, what happens in India is that there are special schools for persons with blindness, and they say do not allow students with visual impairment to study subjects like mathematics and sciences, thereby cutting them off from accessing that kind of curricula. Whereas if a child goes to an inclusive school, then you get access to all kinds of subjects that are being taught by a school. Plus, you get time to compete with your sighted counterparts. Secondly, why inclusive education is more important is also because when a child is in a special education system, then you are only getting connected to a certain kind of people who happen to be like you, and thereby you do not get a sense of adjustment or a sense of adaptation to the other kind of people around you. For example, you do not know how you have to adjust yourself to the non-disabled people around you, because in your learning years, school learning years, primary years, everyone around you is a person with disability. So then what happens is that later on, when you move to a place of work, it creates a barrier for you, because while there are special schools for students with disabilities, there are no special places of work where only persons with disabilities work. So you, in one way or the other, you need to step out into the inclusive world where people around you may or may not have a disability, or they might have a different kind of disability than you have, and you need to know how you have to adapt to them. So this is the second reason why I think that inclusive education is more important. And thirdly, why I think that inclusive education is important is because we are talking about sustainable development goals here. And goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goal ask for inclusive education, and also the other aspects of life that call for inclusion or say full inclusion of persons with disability into the common life. And we all recognize that education is a key to living a full life. So unless the education is inclusive, how do we expect the other aspects of life to get inclusive? So this is why I think that inclusive education is more important for persons with disability.
Thank you, Vipu. And I'd like to ask you one more question. What do you think organizations working for persons with disabilities need to do to keep students with disabilities within the mainstream education? Or maybe in other words, what should be the most important role of such organizations in helping students with disabilities in education?
Thank you once again, Salam, for your question. I guess organizations have a very important role to play over here, because when we are talking about integrating students with disabilities into the mainstream education, we all recognize that they will be using technology at a vast level to compete or to adjust themselves into the mainstream education. And organizations happen to get the primary access or primary information to any new assistive device or any new technology that comes up for use of students with disabilities. So what I think that these organizations should necessarily take notice of doing is that they should educate their associated students with disabilities about what technology is available for them to use. For example, if an organization did teach students Braille, and now there are assistive devices available, like for example JAWS is available on computer, and if the organization doesn't tell the students that there is a software called JAWS that you can use on a computer for your classwork or homework or whatever it is, that students would never get to know it, because there has to be some source of information. So organizations can, one, become a very important source of information, and not only providing with the knowledge, but also training, if possible, to its associated students with disabilities. Secondly, people who were talking previously have reflected on the importance of the teacher's role in an inclusive education, which I guess is very important, because it's important to firstly train the trainer. And I guess if these organizations can have awareness programs whereby they train teachers, or they make teachers aware of what technology is available and how they have to accommodate a student with disability into the general classroom, that would be great. So that is where I think that these organizations can really play a role in integrating students with disabilities into the mainstream education.
Thank you, Vipu, very much for your very useful contribution. Now back to you, Aaron. Well, first, I want to thank everyone for their amazing answers, and I want to ask Aaron, what do you think about the interesting contributions made by our panelists today? Given that we have some of the amazing activists around the world, they're doing pretty good job advocating for education, whether for refugees, people with disabilities, and others. And I want to ask what else young people can do to keep these discussions going. Thank you.
So first, let me really congratulate you, Salam, for doing such a wonderful job in moderating, and all the different people that have contributed. I'm really impressed, deeply, by their commitment to education, by their knowledge of what's going on in their communities, what they've learned from the report, how they see connections between some of the things that we've placed in the report and their own lives. And perhaps more than anything else, the way they have found ways to become very active, as we, the word active is part of the activist, so that they really change makers, wanting to be agents of change. And they raise a lot of issues that I think are very important for us to follow up with. Vivian, talked a lot about the special obstacles that adolescent girls face in first gaining access to, let's say, secondary education, but also staying in school because of household chores, because of inadequate sanitation facilities, because of marriage proposals that their families have put forward. These are really important factors that often, not that they're overlooked, but maybe we don't sufficiently understand how they, they impact, the outcomes of whether adolescent girls stay in school or not. I thought made a lot of really interesting points about, for example, the need to depoliticize the curriculum of a lot of countries, and what it means. Yesterday at the launch in the UK, the moderator there, Kevin Watkins, who used to be a director of this report team, basically said at one point, babies are born, they don't have prejudices, they don't hate people. This is something that they have to learn, and it's usually their parents or somebody in their family that teaches them, to have these kind of prejudices and hatred. So, the question is, what role do schools play in trying to mitigate sometimes the negative impact of families or various kinds of prejudices? How do we build a curriculum that's more empathetic, which was a word that Anusha used, which I thought, was a great what let's say a quality global citizenship education curriculum should look like, it should be one that is empathetic, and we often don't think about it in those terms. And I think Joseph really helped us to see just how important the kinds of teachers and facilitators that reach out to refugees who are in such difficult circumstances, in whether it be in camps or in urban areas. The kinds of teachers, they need to have special language skills. They have to have special knowledge about the obstacles and the rules that refugees are facing. They need to be able to impart all kinds of special skills. These are not their usual teachers. They really need to have a different repertoire of practices that they can bring to bear on the classroom that I think is really important. And so take any teacher and just put them in a school with refugees, it's quite clear from Joseph's intervention that that's not going to be the only way out. And Peter talked also a lot about the way in which young people with disabilities are often denied access to particular subjects. Vibhu also mentioned that there's a lot of disciplines that schools, even if they're intent to mainstream students with disabilities, nevertheless only go part of the way. The commitment is not as strong as it needs to be, and I think that came out very, very strongly. And I thought David was very astute in the way that he mentioned the key role that secondary education plays and how difficult it's going to be to, even if it was, let's say, relatively easy to get 90% or more of young people around the world into primary education, the lift of trying to universalize secondary education for many countries, including many countries in the global north, is enormous for all kinds of reasons that are special to the lives of adolescents and all kinds of competing forces that affect their lives and the kinds of things that their family and their communities often demand of them. But it's also a very special time because that's often the time that they that they begin to understand who they are, their identity, and what kinds of decisions they want to make in terms of building their lives. So all of these things I think are really important. So in closing, I really appreciate all the different interventions that you have made here, the activists, and we will certainly make an attempt to take them on and think very carefully about how we can maybe integrate them in the further work we do on the report, in the months and years to come. So thank you all very much, and thank you so much, Salam, again for your moderation.
Thank you.
Your moderating abilities. It's great. Okay. All the best to everybody.
Well, before we close this, we have one question from Syria. Actually,
okay.
It's coming. Okay. He's asking. His name is Iyad, and he's asking, what do you think of e-learning as a tool for reaching those in need for education but can't reach it? I think we've talked about formal and informal education, but we haven't mentioned the e-learning. So, do you have any points on this? Any thoughts?
So I think that, certainly if we understand there are young people who wish to educate themselves or who wish to get a further education, and something about the formal structures inhibit their ability to really reach their full potential, then I think e-learning can be potentially a solution. So it may be, for example, that refugee children in camps who can't get access to disciplines, maybe through an e-learning platform, this might be possible to meet some of their needs. Certainly that might be true even for some children that might have disabilities. But I would be cautious of wanting to see it as a solution that substitutes for the kind of education that's being provided. Governments really need to, it's their responsibility to ensure good quality education for all children, to leave no one behind. That's part of the commitment that they've made with the SDGs. And so if e-learning is used as a supplement rather than as a substitute, then I think it's okay. But again, it probably depends a little bit also on the age level of the child, or the adolescent for that matter. Are there other questions
Yes,
that you received?
No, not really, but I would like to thank you for bringing this up as being an important tool for refugees, because I know from what my country is going through that many refugees completely lost their chances of equality education, and e-learning is the only way now for them. So I really want to thank you, Aaron, and thank everybody. I think that's all, unless you want to add anything.
Just assalamu alaikum to salam al-kubta.
Thank you.
Okay. All the best to everybody.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, friends.
Bye.
Bye.